Let me begin by saying I appreciate these gentlemen behind me coming to support us today. We have Senator Johnny Salling and Congressman Harris. Thank you for being here, sir. And we'll hear from him in just a moment. And then Delegate Rick Metzger, Pastor David Lewis. We appreciate these and others that are with us today. On behalf of the church that I'm honored to serve as pastor, Calvary Baptist Church in Dundalk, Maryland, I'd like to address the citation that we received from Baltimore County Department of Inspections for holding services on Memorial Day weekend, May the 24th. I find it ironic that our church was fined specifically because of a special worship service in which we honored the men and women that fought to preserve our liberties and freedoms. That citation was an offensive gesture that dishonored the sacrifice of our fallen heroes that died fighting so that we, among other things, could go to church whenever we wanted to and worship God however we choose. After much prayer and with deep Bible-based conviction, we decided to return to holding in-person services on Sunday, May the 17th. On Monday, May the 18th, we received a cease and desist order from the Baltimore County Health Department. In protest, I tore up this letter on my church platform during the midweek service. In Acts chapter number 5, verses 27 through 29, Peter and the other apostles were brought before the council for disobeying a direct order. Their answer, when confronted by the authorities, was simple: we ought to obey God rather than men. We strongly disagreed with the Baltimore County Health Department's premise that by holding church services, we would endanger the community, especially considering the stringent reopening safety policies that we had implemented. Furthermore, we were strongly opposed to the implication that the citizens of Baltimore County would be more susceptible to the virus at church than at the host of other places that were allowed to remain open during this shutdown. If Baltimore County was so concerned about the spread of COVID-19, then why were places much larger than our church, taking far less precautions than our church, allowed to remain open? Why were churches limited to 10 people, while places like Home Depot, Giant Foods, Target, Walmart, and other establishments allowed up to and in excess of 300 people in their stores all at the same time, all day long, all week long? Our church required masks, checked temperatures at the door, practiced social distancing, and implemented a number of other health precautions, including following the governor's guidelines of less than 50% capacity in the building. If the citizens of Baltimore were permitted to take the risks associated with going to the grocery store, or the hardware store, or the liquor store, or the marijuana dispensary, how could they be strictly forbidden to assume any risks in attending church services with their family? The county's position is completely unreasonable that worshiping together in groups of more than 10 is deadly, but shopping with hundreds of people is perfectly safe. I would like to make 2 points. First of all, as many Bible-believing Christians do, we hold to the Scripture as our final authority for all matters of faith and practice. We strive to pattern every aspect of our life according to its teachings and doctrines. We fail many times, but we do try. The Bible is very clear that the people of God are to worship Him together. Live streaming and recorded services are fine, but that is not the historic or the most biblical way to have church. Hebrews 10:25 is unmistakable in its command: not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. To tell us how and when and where we are to worship, who can go and who can't, how many can go and how many can't, is essentially the government establishing a religion. No American should be comfortable with that. We voluntarily suspended our church services during this pandemic out of an abundance of caution over the unknowns pertaining to this virus. Once we decided to safely and carefully resume holding services, we strongly believe that to continue forsaking the assembling of ourselves together would put us in direct violation to the Word of God. We can no longer, with a clear conscience before God, refrain from assembling ourselves together for corporate worship. Second, though we as Christians believe the Bible to be God's inspired, infallible, and inerrant word, we understand that it is not the position of many of our elected leaders. Though we regret that, we understand that. However, though they may not believe that they are obligated to follow the Scriptures, they are obligated to uphold and defend the Constitution. They are obligated to protect the constitutional rights of their constituents. They are obligated to make laws and issue executive orders that fall within the parameters of the limitations and guidelines described within the Constitution. They placed their hand on a Bible and took an oath, and we are holding them to that. Not only did we believe that we had a specific biblical mandate to reopen our church, but we also have specific privileges provided to us in the First Amendment of the Constitution. The same Constitution that gives the press here today the freedom to be here and do their job. The same First Amendment that protects our right to petition the government for redress of grievances on the streets of this city also provides protection for us to freely exercise our religion without anyone prohibiting it. The members of our church have constitutionally guaranteed rights of free speech and freedom of religion that are worthy of protection. Just as it is my duty as a pastor and as a preacher of the gospel to adhere to the Scriptures, it is the duty of our elected officials to uphold and defend the Constitution. Sending our church a cease and desist order was unconstitutional. Fining our church for reopening was also unconstitutional. I'm greatly disturbed by the decision of our local elected officials, primarily the Baltimore County Executive, to essentially weaponize the local government departments against our church. It was the health department that issued a cease and desist letter. It was the Department of Inspections that issued us a citation for unsafe structures on a perfectly safe building, a beautiful, magnificent building that they never even inspected. This was an abuse of power. It is governmental overreach, and we will not sit back and allow this to happen in our community without doing everything within our power to call out this injustice. We respectfully but strongly urge the county to withdraw this unconstitutional citation against our church. We will not be silent, and our team of attorneys and experts will not rest until this injustice has been corrected. In closing, if you do not know Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, and have never experienced the joy and peace of His free gift of salvation, it is our prayer that you will before it is everlasting and eternally too late. Thank you for your time, and may the Lord richly bless you. I have prepared statements for anyone from the media that would like a copy. At this time, I will invite United States Congressman Harris to come and make some remarks.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you very much. This press conference is about something as serious as it gets: the rights and liberties and freedoms of Americans. Now, before I start, I'll tell you right now that we're all violating the law right now, because this is a public gathering of more than 10 people, and until 5 p.m. tonight, the governor has said you can't have a public gathering of more than 10 people, but the police, who are with us today, are appropriately not taking action. Why do I say that? Because they have read the Constitution and have sworn to uphold it, and they've read the First Amendment. They know there is a right to assembly. Now let's get to the crux of the matter in this case. The crux of the matter here is that discrimination against a church is what has taken place. Because we know that, for instance, an assembly occurred right here earlier this week, way over the 10-person limit, with no action taken by the county. Appropriately, no action taken by the county because the First Amendment right to assemble was respected. Let's contrast that with the action against Calvary Baptist Church. Now, just as an aside, the actions taken by local jurisdictions were based on declarations of essential and non-essential businesses and entities of the Department of Homeland Security and the federal government. But remember, the president has declared places of worship essential services. So in the first place, there was no reason for excluding churches, just like Walmarts and Home Depots weren't excluded. But to make it worse, as the Attorney General has pointed out on multiple occasions now, you cannot discriminate against houses of worship in enforcing lockdown orders. The fact of the matter is the discrimination here is clear, because no actions by Baltimore County were taken against other public gatherings of more than 10 people that didn't have to do with religious services, and yet a fine was levied in this case because of the clear discrimination against places of worship. And just parenthetically, I will tell you, my parents fled communist countries because churches were discriminated against, because there was no right to freely assemble, because there was no right to worship the way you choose. Coming to this country, believing in the First Amendment, the Constitution, and our rights and freedoms as Americans. I call on the county government to cease and desist in this attempt to fine a place of worship. And I am ready and willing. Those of you who have seen my letter, the Attorney General has already seen a copy of my letter to the county executive. I will ask the Department of Justice to pursue this discrimination case against places of worship if the county does not cease and desist from fining Calvary Baptist Church. Thank you very much. I'm more than happy to answer any questions anyone has.
The best legal minds in Maryland and in the nation have upheld a governor's limitations on this sort of thing. The courts have.
That's incorrect. What they have upheld is the ability of the government to enforce uniformly. And the Attorney General has made this point time and time again. The courts have upheld that, and I think honestly incorrectly, by the narrowest of margins. Now remember, the Supreme Court on a 5-4 merely refused to issue an injunction. Not a final ruling, refused to issue an injunction. So the final word is not out on that. But the fact of the matter is it's been clear. If you're going to enforce these, you must enforce them uniformly. My question is, where is the enforcement of Monday's public gathering, public assembly, also protected under the First Amendment? And I put on a uniform to defend the First Amendment and fought for it, and I would I would be up here if the police had issued or Baltimore County had taken action against those people assembling in protest on Monday, I would be up here with them as well. But it is incorrect to say that the courts have held that discrimination against the place of worship in enforcing lockdown orders is legal.
Congressman, I had another question about what's going on in the world today. There's a lot of debate about defunding the police. Do you have any thoughts about how police can be reformed without going to defunding the police?
At the microphone, I'm going to answer questions only pertaining to this particular case. This is an exceedingly important case. That issue is important. I'll take the question later.
Why not just appeal?
You know, in America, when you're going up against the government, it's kind of a one-sided fight. There are a lot of lawyers in these buildings who work for the county, and what you're asking is whether or not this church should have to pay the expense of lawyers for what is on its face clearly an unconstitutional action by the county. Every American should be afraid of the county coming after them, or the state or the federal government. That's what's happening in this case. The county is wielding authority that they don't have and hoping, I guess, that the pastor says, you know, it'll cost me more to defend this than a $500 fine. Maybe I should just pay the fine. No way. if this has to go to the Supreme Court, I will back them in every step of the way. And to assert, why don't we take this to court, is again, something every American should be afraid of. That they have to defend themselves against clearly unconstitutional actions by a government, go through the expense of it, to have to go to court. Yes, sir.
My question is for Pastor Shiflett. Have you gotten any other correspondence from the county besides? No.
And our office, by the way, has not had an answer from the county executive to our letter.
Is there a place where we can see that letter?
Oh, you can. It was released with the press release. I'll make copies available. Absolutely.
And specifically, what will the Justice Department, you asked them to do? I mean, just open an investigation?
Absolutely. Into discrimination against a place of worship. And again, this is exactly to the point the Attorney General has spoken about now for 3 weeks. The latest in his interview Monday, where he agrees that it is possible that the courts will uphold uniform enforcement of these orders. But his feeling, which I think is the very correct interpretation, is that this has to be uniform. And clearly Baltimore County is not uniformly enforcing the public distancing lockdowns. So again, I urge Baltimore County to rethink this. This is poorly thought out. This is unconstitutional. And if I were the citizens of Baltimore County, I'd be angry at their officials spending what is going to spend a lot of money defending themselves against the Department of Justice investigation if the Attorney General chooses to investigate.
How much support do you have from the public on this?
I think that most people in the public view discrimination against places of worship as something that is pretty un-American.
Any other churches involved?
This is the only one I know that has received a fine. I know the pastor here has also received a cease and desist letter. And again, you know, a fine is an action that goes far beyond just writing a letter. It means you have to go into what I think was called a quasi-judicial hearing. I mean, it's hauling you in front of a quasi-judicial hearing, which is going to occur next Monday, unless the county reneges on this. That takes it up a notch. That clearly makes it different from the way the county has enforced other large public gatherings.
You opened for 2 weeks against the order, and then a week later they reopened churches. Is there a chance that this all could just kind of fizzle out because of that?
Thank you for that question. So yes, we did have actually 4 services in between the cease and desist letter and the county executive opening the county to 50% capacity in the churches. I just think it's interesting to note that the citation that was made out to Calvary Baptist Church was done 2 hours before his press conference when he opened up the county to 50% capacity. Make no mistake, our church was targeted, our church was specifically pointed out, and it's very obvious because the fine was from the Department of Inspections, which is far outside their purview what we did, number one. Number two, they never came and inspected our church. Never showed up, never asked a single question. So our church was rendered a fine for unsafe structures because we had services on the 24th, but on the 30th when we had services, the building now is magically safe. And so it's an offense to our people. It was an offense to our church. We have labored and worked. We've got a beautiful, absolutely beautiful, stunning sanctuary. And for our church to be rendered an unsafe structure fine, as I said in my speech, was weaponizing the department. And so for that, we're standing our ground. We're going to pursue this. We are represented by a national Christian legal team, National Center for Life and Liberty. They're handling this case for us. I think the hearing is on Tuesday morning, Congressman. And so we covet your prayers as we press forward with making our case. We had a professional hygienist put together a long list of an official report of our church and our COVID-19 reopening policies. As I said in my video that I put out on Sunday, our church was safer than any place in Dundalk, Maryland. And so we're going to move forward with this. I appreciate each and every one of you coming out. And this concludes our press conference today. Thank you so much.